Good morning, Janusz.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Dzień dobry.
Announcements, persistent learning announcements. A year of learning sponsored by Julia and Boris Kagan to commemorate the years of Julia's father, Yusuf Ben Mato. A month of learning sponsored by Annette and Jerry Cranston to commemorate the years of Annette's parents, Kenya and Joseph Simra, Leah the Parrots, and Yosef and Sarah the Pesach. And a day of learning sponsored by David Robin to commemorate the years of his father, Marvin Robin, may have been Yoshua on the 1st of Tammuz. I sent out the email about the upcoming programs. Take a look. They all need reservations. So that's going to be coming up, within the next week and a half. Okay, that went out this morning. Okay, ready to go.
Is it recording? Yeah. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
A number of years ago, I guess a good 40 years ago, I gave a series of lectures for the UJA on Jewish law as ethical imperatives. And number 10 in the series is a subject of our discussion this morning. Can the rabbis change a biblical law? Is it possible for the rabbis do they have the authority to change a biblical law? In technical terms, this might be called extra-legal juridical prerogatives, things that go beyond the halacha, perhaps in order to preserve the halacha. Other times it's called hora'at sha'ah, special temporary legislation. For example, also many years ago, I think they suspended daylight savings time for a year. And it meant people were going to work. It was still dark outside. And the problem was, what do you do about davening? People had to go to work, but it was too early. So Rav Moshe issued a special heter only for the time period when this law was still in effect, that you could daven earlier than normal. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to daven with a minyan. You wouldn't get davening in. So he issued a special horat sha'ah for that particular time. You could daven early until they took care of daylight savings time and so forth. All of this, and there's a lot of discussion on this. It's all based on a pasuk in Tehillim. Interesting pasuk. The pasuk says, "Eis lasos lashem hefeiru torasecha." Eis lasos lashem. When it's a time to act for Hashem, hefeiru torasecha. You are allowed, perhaps, to break or abrogate the law. That's a very radical statement to make. And again, who is the one that is allowed to do this? Rashi pretty much summarizes Chazal's opinion on this, and that says if the times require a change in the normal halachic procedure, then you can abrogate, you can change certain commandments in order to preserve the Torah, the bigger picture. Now, again, we have to mention the circumstance which this occurs. Up until the end of the 18th century, when there was a need for a rabbinic enactment of any sort, there was a unified rabbinic authority. So in the time of the Gemara, the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you had a Sanhedrin. After the Churban Beis HaMikdash, you had Usha, and you had Yavne, you had other places where the Sanhedrin met. In the Middle Ages, you had the, I guess you call it the communal conferences, takonos akehilos, where the Rishonim, Rashi, Rabbi Tam, Rabbi Gershom, we get all the great rabbis together, and they would issue enactments and decrees in many, many areas. The famous takana of not marrying more than one woman is an example. And also among those takonos, when the same ordinances were issued, they also said you can't read somebody else's mail. I mean, there were a lot of things that they said. So the rabbis would get together, and this throughout the Middle Ages, up until, through the Reformation, up until the Emancipation. When the rabbis got together, they spoke with a unified voice, and people generally accepted the halachic rulings in special circumstances, even when they might go against normative halacha. Okay? When the Jewish community began to splinter with the beginning of the Emancipation, and once the Jews became more accepted in Western society and later on in Eastern European society, and there were other groups that proclaimed their version of Judaism, whether it was Reform or what's called the modern historical school, which eventually became conservative Judaism, rabbinic authority was no longer vested in one area or one group of rabbis. We are also rabbis, they would say. When the Reform rabbinate decided kashrus wasn't important anymore and they served a shrimp dinner at their annual meeting, that was the Reform movement making a statement. But so you didn't, up until this time period, the end of the 18th century, you no longer had rabbis who could issue authoritative rulings on contemporary situations that would be followed by all these Jews, the entire Jewish community. The observant community would follow it. There are a few examples of modern takonos, modern changes that were accepted by the Orthodox community because they're the only ones that really cared about it. The first one, for example, you had selling chametz before Pesach, mechiras chametz. Jews owned granaries, they owned bakeries, and if they got rid of all the chametz before Pesach, they'd be broke. So the rabbis came up with selling chametz to a non-Jew. Fine. They came up. Now, all this, where does authority come from? Who gave them the authority to do this? If you go back to Hillel in the time of the Gemara, the Torah tells us that every 7 years, aside from letting the land lie fallow, debts are forgiven. Okay? If you borrowed money from somebody and you haven't paid it back by the next Shemitah year, the debt is wiped clean. What was the result of that? People stopped lending money in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. And people who needed it couldn't borrow money. So the rabbis came up and they developed the concept of a prusbul, which was a rabbinic device which allowed you, the Bezdin would collect the debt on your behalf, whatever the technicalities would be. But the prusbul was a rabbinic enactment that is contrary to the Torah. The Torah says debts are forgiven. The rabbi said, no, they're not. Eis lasos lashem. It's a time to act to preserve the greater picture. Hefeiru Torasecha. You're allowed to change, to avoid the law for a greater good. And there are a number of situations where the rabbis did this, where the rabbis repealed or modified or reinterpreted the laws. Prusbul is, and by the way, Shmuel, who came up with this idea, was opposed. Many rabbis said, what are you talking about? You can't override a clear biblical mandate. But he succeeded because this was something that was very, very important. They were uneasy about it, and they tried to mitigate what they called legal radicalism, because, once you start doing it, where do you stop? And that's always a danger. And again, you could do this when you had a universally recognized rabbinic body. One of the biggest problems that we're facing in the Jewish community today is the issue of aguna. All right? Women who can't get remarried because their husbands will not give them a get. It's a serious. Now, there are ways that have been suggested over the years, but since we no longer have a unified rabbinic authority, then there are those on the right who will say this is not good. How can you do it? And there's no centralized, nobody to speak. There's no Sanhedrin. There's no chief rabbi, except in Israel, and there too, his power is somewhat limited by the Eidah Haredis and other groups. The Sanhedrin doesn't exist, but in rabbinic times and Talmudic times, the rabbis actually went ahead and acted contrary to the halacha. For example, another example, I think I mentioned this once before. Sanhedrin, when they execute somebody, which is very rare, you can only execute one person a day. And there's a whole lot, this whole procedure. If you hang him up, and as somebody's hanging up the body, somebody's taking it down. A lot of halachos about the misos bezdin. One person per day maximum. Shimon ben Shetach, the very prominent rabbi, Shimon ben Shetach is the one who instituted the Jewish day school system. Very important guy. He found a group of women who were practicing witchcraft, and they were all hiding out in a cave, and there were 70 of them. And he and his Talmidim, I'm sorry, there were 80, excuse me, there were 80, according to Gemara and Sanhedrin. There were 80, and it's brought down in Yerushalmi Tagiga and several places. He hanged them all in one day. 80 women were hanged in one day. How can you do that? Misas Bezdin is one per day. And he said it's a special temporary legislation because the times required it. Okay? And there were many other things. During the time of the Chashmonoim, the Bezdin Shalchat, no, there's very little in the Gemara about the Chashmonoim. Almost nothing. But every so often, there's a mention of the Bezdin Shel Chashmonoim, the rabbinical court. And they were very, very strict because there's a lot of assimilation. Hanukkah as a battle of victory of traditionalism versus assimilation. And they would punish people very severely for minor, not minor, but if a person behaved immorally or indecently in public, even with his wife, he would be severely punished. Because these are not normative values that they wanted to pursue. Now, halachically, they did not have a leg to stand on. Yet, they made a decision that we're going to preserve certain Jewish values, and therefore we're going to take very, very strict measures. And it's several Gemaras, Yerushalmi and Bavli, give examples of the Bezdin Shel Chashmonoim doing this with the special temporary legislation. Yes.
Who gave them that right?
Who gave them that right? Very good. The Torah, when the Torah talks about legislative authority, so Hashem says to Moshe, when you appoint judges, people have to follow those judges. And based on the pasuk, Kol Asher Yorucha, whatever they decide has my haskama. So if you have duly authorized rabbinic authorities, whether it's a Bezdin or a Sanhedrin, they have the right to impose martial law. They have the right to create special temporary legislation, this Hora'at Sha'ah that we're talking about. And they did it. And this is throughout the Talmudic period and even to the times of the Rishonim. In the times of again, they had these Takanos HaKahilos. They had these communal conventions once or twice a year where they all got together and they issued Takanos. And there's a whole book of Takanos. It's called Jewish Self-Government in the Middle Ages, published by, put together by Louis Finkelstein, where he gathered all the manuscripts of all these Takanos from Spain, from Europe, all over the place. And they had that authority to do that, to maintain the integrity of the Jewish community. Yeah.
All of these have time limits, like I know with that getting married to more than one person.
Some of these things had in Spain, some of them had time limits, some did not. Some did not. Yeah.
The number of brachas that we say, we say bracha to Hashem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not in the Torah.
Of course. Yeah.
Hashem gave the rabbi.
They had the ability, they created brachos, they created rituals, Hanukkah licht, making a bracha, I mean, all these things. All these things. There are technicalities in terms of marriage and divorce. Where was he? The question is raised, do they have the authority? What gives them the authority? What gives them the authority is how he asked, to uproot biblical laws. For example, the Torah says to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, even when it's on Shabbos. The day requires to get shofar. The rabbi said, if Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos, no shofar. Because somebody might carry it, Daled Amos, just a rabbi, to violate another law. So, but by abrogating this ability, this mitzvah, they've changed a biblical law. The Torah says, blow shofar. The rabbi said, not on Shabbos. They had that authority. See, authority is based, and this is true for everybody, in every circumstance. Authority is based on the fact that you have people following your authority. If a king doesn't have subjects, he's not a king. If a Rebbe doesn't have Hasidim, he's not a Rebbe.
Why?
Yes.
There must have been a lot of protest when these things were enacted.
Okay. There were rabbinic protests. Some rabbis objected when other rabbis would make changes like this, but you have a majority rule. The Sanhedrin would take a vote, the rabbis would take a vote. And again, this only, as I said in my opening remarks, this capacity to make rabbinic legislation only existed when there were recognized rabbinic bodies in place. And that ended with the Enlightenment. Because there is no longer one religious body to speak on behalf of the Jewish people. But when the Jewish people started becoming fragmented, and this one says we're starting a new movement, whether you want to call it the positive historical school or conservative reform, whatever it might be. So there's no longer one authority. And as a result, since that time until today, rabbis are very reluctant to take a stand on any on major issues, because there's no one rabbinic body that is universally recognized as authoritative, which is sad. We have great rabbinic authorities out there. We have great scholars out there. And again, you have those who are in the active rabbinate, who have one perspective, and you have those who are Rosh Yeshiva in the Beis Medrash, who have a different perspective. They may all belong to the same rabbinic body, but they have different points of view, and there's no unified voice of rabbinic authority in existence today. Even in Israel, you have a chief rabbinate, but the chief rabbinate is limited in terms of kashrus, in terms of marriage and divorce. But there are other rabbinic courts you could go to, and there's other hashgacha agencies that are, the Eidach HaReis has their own kashrus aside from the Rabbanut. So the fact that they were allowed to do this, if I can borrow a neo-Kantian term, I call this the teleological suspension of the halachic. This is based on Immanuel Kant's teleological suspension of the ethical. But this, the teleological means if you have a goal in mind, then you could suspend certain halachos in order to achieve that goal. But who's the they? When you had a recognized rabbinic body that could do that, it was possible. Today, you don't have that anymore. The justification for it is by suspending certain laws, you are in fact maintaining or what's what I'm looking for? By suspending certain laws, you are allowing it to be observed. and it won't disappear altogether. Yeah.
Things like, let's say, a Greene, put into the marriage contract certain conditions.
Yes.
Which would make sure we don't have. That probably is not accepted by them.
Well, you have now the RCA Kasuba, the Aguda, I think, has a similar one where there is not everybody accepts this, but there is language put into the Ksuba in terms of trying to prevent the Aguna. It's a separate agreement. It's not the Ksuba that the Chasna Kala signed. It's a separate prenuptial agreement, which most rabbis accept. I would say 96% of all Orthodox rabbis, when they're Masader Kedushin, would ask the Chasna Kala to sign this prenuptial agreement, which is difficult to do on the day you're getting married, to talk about getting divorced. But if for some reason they should separate, he agrees to pay her X amount of money per day, and he doesn't give her a get. And it has its hurdles halachically, but it's generally been accepted. Rabbi Willig is one of the authors, is in consultation with Rabbi Nehemiah Goldberg. I know that when my daughter got married, she married an attorney, and he wasn't 100% happy with all the terms of this prenuptial agreement. So I put him in touch with Rabbi Willig, and the two of them worked out acceptable language, and they signed it. But it's very important. I mean, and rabbis, I'm not in the practicing rabbinate, but I would strongly urge that no rabbi be Masader Kedushin of anybody without a prenuptial agreement. Otherwise, because you're setting up all types of issues, and Aguna is a horrible status for a woman to be in.
You still have the other 4%.
Yeah, you have those who because it wasn't their Rosh Yeshiva who developed it, and it wasn't their Rebbe who signed off on it. Yeah. And unfortunately, in those communities where you have the highest rate of divorce and aguna and horrible situations, I had I think I mentioned once before, I had a young woman, a Beis Yaakov graduate, who was teaching for me once. She got married. She was very young when she got married, and the day after the wedding, she runs home to mommy because this guy is Nishvi Alaman. It was a bad. Nobody told her or her family about this guy. He was a nut job, and the wedding. But she got married. So what should she do? She runs home after the first day, and I said to her, "Whatever you do, don't talk to a lawyer. Whatever you do, I know somebody who knows somebody, and we'll make this guy an offer. And we'll tell him, you could be a widower. I'm sorry, your wife can be a widow or a divorcee. It's your choice." This wasn't the days when they didn't charge for it. They started charging for doing this service. They got into trouble and they got arrested. Terrible. Unfortunately, she didn't listen to me, and the lawyers got involved, and it cost the family a lot of money that they didn't have to get a get. Now, if the rabbis had this prenuptial agreement, and the rabbis in Muncie would have allowed her to sign it, then she wouldn't have had this problem, and she would have gotten her get, because the guy, unless he had unlimited funds to pay her, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a day. So the rabbis have the halachic ability to modify the halacha when the needs require it. Who the rabbis are, what justifies it, this is something that is an ongoing issue. It takes very, very broad shoulders for a rabbi today to issue special halachos, if you will.
Well, Wally,
Yes.
if the guy signed it but did not pay the money for the get, what type of enforcement was there?
The New York get law, for example, allows a guy to be prosecuted.
So he could be put in jail.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were a couple of cases of guys in Israel who spent years in jail rather than giving their wife a get. Anyhow, this topic is a very important topic, but unfortunately, until Mashiach comes and there's a unified rabbinic body that everybody accepts, this is a theoretical issue. If you'd like to read more about it, it's a fascinating topic. In September of 1976, there was an article published called Extra-Legal Juridical Prerogatives in the Journal for the Study of Judaism in the Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman period. You can Google it online. I happen to be the author of it. I don't know if you can't see it on this thing. Yeah. Yes. Anyhow, it's an interesting article, I think, and they did too because they published it. But it goes into it in much, much more detail to show the rabbinic, the Talmudic basis for Hora'at Sha'ah, for special temporary legislation. You could write a separate article, and articles haven't written, and books have been written on the medieval rabbis and the takanos that they issued. Tremendous number of takanos having to do, for example, I mean, you could do this in the Middle Ages, you can't do it now. Spousal abuse, for example, is a serious issue. Always has been, unfortunately. The Maharam of Rutenberg, one of the last Balei Tosfos, one of the Gadol Hador of the 13th century, says that if somebody comes to me with an issue of spousal abuse, I'll cut off his hand. I will convene the Bezdin and we'll cut off his hand. Did they actually do it? I don't know. But very often, the rabbinical courts had the cooperation of the secular courts to enforce the halacha, whether it was fines, arresting people, so forth and so on. So there are many things that the rabbis were able to do when you had a united rabbinical authority that was recognized by everybody. As I said, up until the modern period, it wasn't a problem because there was only one variety of Judaism. I mean, you had throughout history, you had the Sadducees, Tzaddukim, and you had the Karaim, but they never really became a serious threat. Tzaddukim at one point did become a serious threat, but they were overcome by the rabbis. But today, you don't have one universally recognized rabbinic body to issue takanos to deal with some of the issues that contemporary Jewish life require dealing with. I guess we'll have to wait till Mashiach comes for that to happen. But the fact is that halacha, and I'll just end with this. If you analyze all of halacha, basically halacha is geared to enforce not only legal but ethical imperatives as well. There's an ethical component to the observance of halacha. The Marsha, at the end of Yevamos, talks about this. He says at the end, the halachos, usually there's agadata at the end of every parak in Gemara. And Yevamos is straight halacha, which deals with a lot of sensitive issues, husband and wife relationships. And he goes off on a tangent, and he repeats the same agadata in several, end of Gittin also he has the same thing, where he says that the function of the rabbis is to ensure that the observance of halacha takes place within an ethical framework. That's the goal. Halacha is an ethical imperative, and we have to do whatever we can. And even if that means sometimes changing the halacha in order to make it more ethical, that's possible. So it's an important topic. B'mheira, Yibana Hamikdash, Debia Sanhedrin, and we can have a united rabbinic front to deal with some of the issues that confront the Jewish community today, especially in the area of marriage and divorce. Any other questions? But take a look at that article. I'm not just promoting because I wrote it, but it goes into much more detail. The title of the article is Extra Legal Juridical Prerogatives. Extra Legal Juridical Prerogatives in the Journal for the Study of Judaism in the Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman period.
Google your name.
You can Google my name with that article. Yeah. Okay. Have a great day, everybody.
Was that Sickle Street Press? Good. Have a nice day.
Take care, Hal.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, your bench, please. We have two people that
Yeah.
lost it.
Okay. Rabbi Sign Vorech. Shem Baruch Tavad Allah, Shus Kol Pesumim Kan, Vorech Shalom, Who knows who left in the bonus?